Does Richard's rant invalidate the well-being of white children? This is the kind of thing that you can ask in a conversation with friends, family, or stranger. Does an individual's rant invalidate the well-being of white children? Should white children not be protected from the abuse that anti-whiteism inflicts on them physically, mentally, and spiritually because an individual named Richard ranted somewhere? Are you beginning to see how trivial and asinine this is? Are you beginning to see how quickly you can put your interlocutor, whoever you're speaking with, right immediately in their place? Should Western civilization not be defended? Should we not preserve all that we have done, all that has been handed down to us, all that it is our duty to protect and to pass on to those who come after us? Because some individual somewhere was so pissed off that he ranted this wild rant and was recorded by somebody who he thought was a friend, I assume, thought was maybe somebody thought he was showing off for, whatever it was. Should all of that be lost because this individual ranted and said something ugly? Should all of that be surrendered? Should we not do our duty because somebody ranted and said ugly words, because somebody has some ugly opinions? Put those you're talking with into their place by phrasing it this way. Does Richard's rant delegitimize the defense of Western kind, of white children, of our Western culture, of all of Western civilization? The kind of people, this is the real story when it comes to Richard's rant. This is what you can share with anybody who brings this subject up in your life. The real story here about Richard's rant is not that some person who has taken himself out of the white positive sphere largely, or been ostracized by the white positive sphere largely, or whatever it is. The real story is not that that individual had some rant somewhere after he was physically attacked and maced, and that allowed to happen by anti-whites in the street, and then physically attacked and maced by law enforcement. The real story is not that such a person ranted in a way that most people are going to find objectionable. That's not the real story. The real story are the people who are celebrating the rant right now. That's the real story, because those SOBs are revealing to you that they are the worst of the anti-whites alive, because they know, they're feeling with this information coming out into their hands that they can now delegitimize all efforts by all people that are white positive with this information. Those individuals that are celebrating this now are saying to each and every one of you that they are the most anti-white, desirous of white erasure individuals that you will ever meet in your life. Because this, they feel, empowers them. This, they feel, instantiates and makes real the anti-white narrative, even though they know that the anti-white narrative is false. Even though they know, just like all of you, when they go out in the world, they can look at the real data. They know what neighborhoods they're not going to go traipsing through in the middle of the night. They know that this rant is going to serve them well in years to come, because they're going to be able to say, oh, this person doesn't mean that, because just look at what this other person said in private. There, now you're not allowed to defend white children. And that, my friends, is the story about this whole Richard Spencer rant. That it immediately outs the anti-whites for those who are the sickest and most deranged, those who want nothing more than to inflict harm on your babies. They know every time that you want to stand in front of the sickness that they want to expose them to at the next class or at the next library, or some person dressed in some outrageous demonic clothing stripping for them on stage. They know that when you stand in between them and our babies, they're going to pull that audio out. They have revealed to you everything you need to know about them. That's the lesson. I might be wrong. Some of you would argue. I have a lot of people who have argued with me saying, oh no, from the first he was this, from the first he was that. We will say that at some moment, Richard had a moment of purest love for our people. And then, just as the case with all humans, the fallibility, the personal weaknesses, personal proclivities get in the way, and certainly most of all, the error of looking out into the world and asking yourself, what does it look like, mean, and etc., to oppose anti-whiteism in the world? Being the villain in their story rather than the hero in ours. If you take up the dress or the haircuts or the whatever, the language of other eras that the anti-whites have said are the bad guys, you are making a grievous error. If you take up the language, the racial epithets, or whatever that the anti-whites have said are the opposition to us, you are making a grievous error. If you take up the thoughts that they say are the anti-whites say are the opposition to us, you are making a grievous error. It is execrable, ladies and gentlemen. It is curseable. It doesn't get worse in your effort for white well-being than to take on the caricature, to personify the anti-white villain in their story. When Richard broke out into this rant, he was personifying the villain in their story. Now, I have been to many conferences that Richard has spoke at. I've said this to you all before. I have had conversations, been on the same show with him before. And we all heard this imperialist sort of talk. There would be, if the situations were reversed, if this were a black, if this were a Jew, if this were a Hispanic who had held a rally and went to the rally at some town, and the locals of this town and others shipped in were permitted by law enforcement and the government there to physically attack him at the rally that he was supposed to speak at, to mace him at the rally that he was supposed to speak at. And then the law enforcement physically assaulted him, and the law enforcement maced him. The law enforcement pushed him out into that mob that earlier was beating him and macing him so that he had to run for his life. The governance of the town then said, and all of these white people say, condemned him for showing up, blamed him for everything that they were responsible for. If he then was recorded outraged, using foul language, would not the anti-whites make nothing but endless excuses for him? And would you indeed, as a white person, most white people out there, would you not indeed say, well, it's understandable that he would be kind of in that state, saying these really ignorant things after all of that had just happened to him? And that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you would, personally, I'm not coming to any conclusions here. I'm asking questions. But I think we can speculate about how most people would treat such a non-white person, how they would handle a story of such a non-white person. But that non-white person would not have the excuse of having lived in an environment where they had been taught that if you want to oppose the people in authority in that town, you have to be the demon in society. So that non-white person wouldn't have been given the path of behavior. No, what were the non-white protesters and the white protesters, the anti-whites of all races, what kind of path were they given to resist? Yes, there were some who did wild, crazy, terroristic things, but what path were the majority of them given in the movies, in the TV shows, in the books, in the magazines, in the stories? They were given a completely different path of how to resist. They were given a completely different set of clothing that such people wear, a completely different set of language, flowers in their hair, ladies and gentlemen, is what they were taught to imitate in the media when they resisted. That is not the path that has been given to our young men. And I mentioned on PWR, the young man in Washington State, of all places, whose record had to be so squeaky clean that he could get a concealed carry permit, and yet, without breaking any laws, now banned from the whole country of Canada because he decided to take on the exterior and the language of and the ideas of the bad guy in the anti-white narrative. And he has now been deprived of his right to self-defense, the federal government using the red flag laws in Washington State to take all of his firearms away. No, our people have been given a path to destruction. I will say this, and I will say this to the end of time. And I pray, dear God in heaven, that all of you will echo this with me to all of our brothers and sisters out there who are going down these destructive roads. Beseech them to stop now. Beseech them to be the hero in our story rather than the enemy in the anti-white story. Because there isn't a lot of time left. The event horizon is approaching, and we need to be ready for it. No excuses for this rant, Richard's rant. No excuses here for Richard's rant. No condemnation, an observation. We here in white well-being, in service to white well-being, we here going free, we redeem our people in the exact same way that the Christian church wraps its arms around sinners and brings them to Christ. Someone can say something hideous. Someone can go down this ignorant path and wear ignorant clothing, march in some ignorant way, imitate some bad guy in the anti-white narrative, and we can bring them back to truth, love, and safety and redemption, the exact same way that Christian church wraps its arms around sinners. So we are not going to shun those who have gone wrong in the past, whether it's for stupid words, stupid symbols, drugs, working in the field of pornography, as we have redeemed folks. We are not going to shun anyone who is willing to go free, who wants to be better, who wants to return to that moment of purest love for our people, and who will instead be the hero in our story. That is the real message about Richard Spencer's rant.